Hi guys, thank you very much for joining. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the Green Range Rover, if you haven't already worked that out by the title. So hands up how many people thought there was only one Range Rover in this story. Yeah, well, there isn't. So we know our story has the blue Range Rover. This is what Tony, Power and Craig were found murdered in. Notice how I always say found and I'll never say killed. Reason being because nobody honestly knows if they were or not killed in that Range Rover. It's likely that at least one of those people were killed in there, and that'll be the driver, Craig, but the other two is still unknown. Now, these are only theories, we know that, but Pat Tate, it seems, was seen elsewhere buying a car, i.e. a VW Passat, at about the same time that he was supposed to be getting in this blue Range Rover. I would say it is absolutely likely that Pat Tate was in there as he was shot and killed. All I'm saying is it's not 100% definite. Tony Tucker may or may not have been killed in this Range Rover, which leads me nicely on to this about Tony Tucker. So we've got the blue Range Rover, and funnily enough, Tony Tucker had a Range Rover too. It was a Vogue style, the style that you're seeing on your screen right now, but it was green. So we go to the statement that tells us that Tucker had this green Range Rover. I know it takes a while to get these statements read, but it's easier to read it right through so you understand the context. It's from somebody called Jay Hassel, and it was made on the 20th of December 95, and he's Pat Tate's neighbour. Pat Tate's at number 49 Gordon Road. This man is either 47 or 51. It doesn't tell us his address, but as he's his neighbour, it's got to be one of those two numbers, hasn't it? So he says, I reside at so-and-so Basildon with my parents. I've been living here for about 6 weeks. The bungalow belonged to my grandmother who recently died. My parents have been living here for most of 1995. My grandmother left the bungalow to my parents in her will. The bungalow next door is number 49. This was occupied by a woman called Sarah who has a young child. I only really knew her to say hello to. She lives there alone. About 4 weeks ago, a male person moved in and I took him to be Sarah's new boyfriend. I would describe him as white, aged in his early 30s. He was over 6 foot tall with a very heavy build. He had short black hair and spoke with a local accent. I only ever spoke to him once when his burglar alarm was ringing. Since he moved in, the number of visitors has increased. I can recall seeing many different types of motor vehicles, which are as follows. 928 Porsche, colour black. Red Volkswagen GTI, no later than F-Reg. A black C-Reg Ford Fiesta XR2. Black Volkswagen Polo, a green Volkswagen Passat, white Ford Orion, and a green Range Rover. Now, first of all, for him to list that green Volkswagen Passat, that is very damaging to my evidence that Pat was in a Volkswagen Passat, or that Pat had just bought that Volkswagen Passat. Unless, of course, he is listing that as a new car that's there, it's still a little bit damaging to that evidence. Because if the Volkswagen Passat theory is right, then that Passat shouldn't be there. But anyway, moving on, that's not anything to do with this. It's important to note there that he's listed a green Range Rover. He goes on to say, most of these vehicles were there at night. Sarah's car was a light coloured Renault 5. The most frequent visitor was a male person who I now know to be Tucker, who drove the green Range Rover. I recognised Tucker and my neighbour, described above as Tate, from photographs I saw in national newspapers covering the murders of 3 men in a Range Rover at Rettendon. Right, so that there is the first time we're introduced to this green Range Rover, and it's Tucker's. Tucker drives it. About 5:30 on Wednesday the 6th of the 12th 95, I was in the back garden of our bungalow when I heard a motor vehicle horn being sounded at the front of the bungalow. I thought it was my mum arriving home from work, as she usually does at this time. I thought it was her sounding the horn because my car was blocking the drive. I walked inside to my dad's office, which is at the front, I looked out the window and saw a Range Rover turning round in front of our bungalow. It was a light coloured one. I don't think it was the same one that Tucker used. I could not see how many people were in it. I could not see my mum's car. The Range Rover stopped in the road outside number 49. I then heard the front door of number 49 slam shut. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a car door being shut. I took this to be the door of the Range Rover. As I walked away, I heard the Range Rover rev up and drive off towards Timberlog Lane. I recall the wheels spinning on the ice and snow. I went into the kitchen and carried on with what I was doing. I am willing to attend court if required. Okay, so this is Pat Tate's next door neighbour, and putting yourself in his shoes. Look, he's living with his parents because his grandmother's just died. His grandmother must be their parent, his mum's parents or his father's parents, right? And she's kindly left the bungalow, her house, to the parents. So I think it's safe to say, above all, they are going to be looking at their surroundings. Obviously, they've just moved in. It's a new place for them to be. They're living there now, and they're going to be aware of their surroundings more than it would be if they'd been there for a lot longer. You know, even if they were just visiting the grandmother, they're not going to be that well aware of what's happening next door, and so is what's happening over the road and stuff. If there's any concern for the grandmother, then obviously they're going to be more aware of what's happening. But because they're living there and it seems like it's a new place, they're going to be more aware of their surroundings, who's next door. And obviously he goes on, doesn't he? Look, he's saying that he's aware of who lives there. He's aware that Sarah's there. She's got a young child. He's aware of Pat Tate. Now, little does this man know, unfortunately, that this is about the time that Pat Tate has actually just come out of prison. He says there that he's just moved in and Sarah is Sarah's new boyfriend. But in fact, Pat's just come out of prison and he's lived there all along. But this bloke don't know. And he's aware of his surroundings, so much so that he's actually recognised that there are more visitors since this man has been in the house. And again, so much so that he's actually taken note of how many cars have been around since this bigger man, Pat Tate, has moved in. There's a Porsche here. I don't know if that's Tony's. 9TT is the number plate. A Volkswagen, there's a Fiesta, a Polo, a Passat, Orion, and obviously this of interest, the green Range Rover. Now this man has become more aware of his surroundings again, so much so that he's actually he knows that Tucker drives the green Range Rover. So it's just natural, isn't it? It's natural instinct to get a good look at your environment and your surroundings and see what's what. To make sure you know that you're safe. This man's done that, and fast forward in that, he's then come across, he knows now his name's Tucker, and it's Tucker who drives this Range Rover. Not forgetting that Pat Tate is a second-hand car dealer. They know a lot of people who are involved in that sector. Barry Dorman, Mickey Bowman, and these people are drug dealers. They are always after different cars. They're always driving different cars. And so it's expected that there'll be a lot of cars coming in and out of this man's place. Right, now that second paragraph there is quite interesting to me personally, because it says about 5:30 on Wednesday the 6th of 95, I was in the back garden of our bungalow when I heard a motor vehicle. It's the horn sounded and it was at the front. He thought it was his mum, but it wasn't. And he goes on to say that he looked out the window and saw a Range Rover. It was turning around in front of the bungalow, and he didn't think it was the one that Tucker used. So he didn't think it was the green one. He said it was a light coloured one. And just using my brain a little bit there, we're talking 5:30 on the 6th of December. I'm looking out the window now, it's 4:30 and it's just getting dark. The 6th of December, it would have been dark at 5:30. The lights would have been on. The street lights would have been on. There was a lot of snow on the floor. The ice on the roads have set. it would have been getting colder. So for this man to say it was a light coloured motor vehicle could have been an optical illusion from the street lights. I don't know about anybody else, but it's the reflection. You'd see the reflection of the light, the street lights, more than anything, more than the actual colour itself. And that's obviously depending if they were white lights or the orange lights that we get nowadays. Either way, at that point in time, for him to say it was a light coloured, I'm suggesting that he's actually seeing it because there was a lot of light from the street lights surrounding the Range Rover. And a light metallic blue would actually come across as a little bit lighter. So this man's saying, look, he doesn't think it was the one that Tucker used. We're going to get onto it in a minute in another statement, but this green Range Rover is a dark green Range Rover as far as I know. Okay, it's a dark green, bottle green. These are on your screen that I'm showing you now are the only ones that I can find. They're off eBay, and it's of a green Range Rover. I don't know if that's bottle green, but it's definitely metallic. I personally don't know what bottle green is. I'm assuming it's like a very dark green though, isn't it? Bottle, you know, like a bottle of beer. They're dark, aren't they? Dark green. But this man here, he's made a definite statement that it was green, and he doesn't think it was Tucker's because it was light. Now this paragraph here is of ultra importance really, because flipping the subjects here, that seems to be quite a common misleading, misguided aspect of this story, that Pat Tate was actually seen at 5:30 leaving his house. That's the reason why people do believe that. People believe that he was picked up from his house, me included. I personally have, it was in my first video, if you remember, I took you from Craig's to Tony's to Pat's. It was based on this very paragraph. The reason why I said, you know, that it's out there that Pat was picked up at home, and it seems that the police even thought that. This is a very important piece of information. It's important because it doesn't actually say that Pat Tate was seen getting into this Range Rover. It was about 5:30, Wednesday the 6th. He was in the back garden. Sorry, my mistake. It's those three. They're really important in this. Those three paragraphs there. I don't know what I was thinking there. It's these three paragraphs that are the important, because you've heard it just now, that he's heard this door slam. He's heard the door slam. It's coming from the neighbour's house, so why wouldn't it be Pat? And this is the common conception that it was Pat. It was Pat coming out of his door. It slammed shut. He heard the Range Rover car door, and everybody's then assuming, well, it must have been Pat coming out of his house, slams the door, and then gets in the Range Rover. But it doesn't actually say it was Pat. There's no absolute definite sighting that it was Pat Tate getting into this Range Rover. It's just assumed that it was. But now we know that Pat Tate was actually seen in this buying or getting this VW Passat at that garage. This kind of conflicts, wouldn't you say? Although it does say about 5:30, and you know, we are estimating on that VW Passat, or it was all around about 5:30, give or take. This still could be Pat Tate getting into the Range Rover from his bungalow. It's just conflicting a tiny bit there. He would have had to been in a major rush to get from that garage to his flat to get in time for Craig. And I don't suppose it matters anyway, because this video is actually going to shoot that right out the water. Okay, so overall you can see this man is saying, look, Tucker had a green Range Rover. So there's two. That's proof. That's what I was trying to get at. Okay, there's the proof. We've got the statement. It's in the statement. Okay, there's a green Range Rover. Tucker used to drive it. And now we've got our blue one. So we've got our blue one and this green Range Rover. It's knowledge at the very least, isn't it? I mean, if you're really interested in this story, just as I and the thousands of others, then you'll know by now, even just that opens things up a bit. So if you're new to the story, or you didn't know that about this story, I'm more than sure that you're going to find that very interesting. Okay, so there's two Range Rovers, one blue and one green. One was Tucker's and one was used by all three. Now when you know that and you realise that it's Tucker's, there's a lot more of the story in these statements that actually starts to make sense, because in a lot of the statements it does mention green and blue. Could have been green and blue. You know, they saw a greeny blue Range Rover, or there was a green Range Rover over there and then a blue one there, and for some reason you just assume that it's the blue Range Rover they're talking about. Adjustments in light, just general mistakes that you're going to make when trying to cast your mind back to what colours. Again, it's about that firework thing, remember? Can you cast your mind back and can you tell us what colour it was? Can you tell us what time it was? You rack your brain so hard, you know, you may make mistakes there. Some people are saying there was a greeny blue Range Rover, or a blue Range Rover could have been green. And when you come across that, you think, okay, so they're saying it was a green Range Rover, and, you know, we're just assuming then they're talking about ours, and they've got them of the colour wrong. And it was, they're saying green, but they meant blue, you know, that kind of thing. But now, that changes things, because it opens things up to say, okay, well, every time somebody's mentioned a green Range Rover, they could have actually got that right, and maybe it was a green Range Rover that they seen. And if it was, that means it's Tucker's. That means that Tucker was around in those areas and that time. So then obviously what I personally have had to do is then go hunting for all those times that a green Range Rover is mentioned. So just quickly, I've picked out some of the times. There are bound to be more throughout all of the statements, but I've picked out a few that I've found that mentions this green Range Rover. They are long statements. I'm not going to read them out. I'll just pick out the bits that are suggesting that there are this Range Rover and a green Range Rover and blue Range Rover. This one, first one, is from somebody called DM Frero. He says he was, this is actually going back, it's about 12:30 in the evening, Thursday the 19th of October 95. He was just leaving his yard and he was in his dark green Isuzu Trooper. He says he was on his own, but his attention was drawn to two Range Rover which pulled out of the transit yard next to Yetton's. He said this yard is a transport yard, but I don't know the name of the firm. There were people in the Range Rovers, and as they drove off up the Hawk Hill towards Rettendon, I followed behind it as it was the route going home. He said he would describe the Range Rovers as a mid-blue metallic paintwork, seemed to be in good condition. And he says that he saw on the news a TV programme called About Anglia, and it was about the report of 3 people in Rettendon being found shot dead. And he said that was in and around the week of the 8th of the 12th 95. They showed a Range Rover in the programme. The vehicle that I'm describing is similar to that in the respect of the colour and the condition. The occupants of this vehicle were 3 big built white men in 30 or 40 age group, in the 30 to 40 age group. I can't describe the men individually. First of all, straight away, it wasn't Pat Tate. Pat Tate was in prison. He says that he took notice more of the driver. He had a rain mat type coat on, white or beige in colour. He says the Mac had epaulettes and big lapels on it. And if you don't know what epaulettes and big lapels, lapels are the flaps on coats. Usually, I can best describe it on a blazer. You know, the flaps that actually come, the collar comes down and it's attached to the lapels. The lapels actually fold over and causes quite a nice design on either the blazer or the coat. And epaulettes, epaulettes are to do with the shoulders. They've got something on the shoulders, like a button or a flap or something like that usually. Some people have tassels on them, but I would assume because this is a rain mac that it would be like a strap with a button on it kind of thing. I hope you know what I mean. And the lapels are at the front. Anyway, he says that the driver wore thick black rimmed glasses with clear glass, and he had short dark hair. He says the other people were seated, one in front of this in the passenger seat, and the other one was immediately behind him. Right, and then he says that there's a second Range Rover. It was a Vogue model, but it's not as new looking as the first one, possibly B or C registration. He can't remember the plate, but he said that the colour was bottle green or a mid green, and there were two occupants in this, and a driver and a front passenger. He says both were big men, both had short hair, but can't describe them any further. As both vehicles made their way up the hill, they stopped to the traffic lights. They were held at the red light, and he says that he was behind the green one. And he says that the passenger of the green Range Rover was talking to the driver of the blue Range Rover. The driver of the blue one had his window down, and they were talking to each other. You can't hear what was said, but it was around in the Rettendon area. He said he continued home. Since that day, I've not seen the Range Rovers or the people. He says that he may be able to recognise some of them because he spent about 2 minutes in their company sort of thing. But he's done right to remember that, and he made that on the 19th of the 12th, 95. Now, what's interesting about this is that, I mean, the police have actually thought that this statement is relevant to this case. They wouldn't have put it in there. It is a statement of relevance to them, and that's why they've kept it in there. It does go back to October though, and you know, Pat Tate's going to be, just to give you some sort of impression of the timescale here, Pat Tate's actually going to be released in 12 days. 19th this is, the 19th of October. Pat was released on the 31st. So this is 12 days, nearly 2 weeks before Pat Tate release. But how relevant that is, I don't know. But what it does show us is that both Range Rovers were used together if, of course, you know, this is a big if as well regarding this, if they're connected to this case, if this was Craig and Tony driving his green one and Craig driving the blue one, you know, it just shows that they used the Range Rovers together. And again, you know, it does show that they're so blatant that they would actually talk to each other at the traffic lights. I mean, how many people do that, you know? There was no worry of them being seen together sort of thing. And it also shows us that there's no concern about sharing vehicles. As I say, they are big ifs. There's absolutely no way of proving that it was ours or Tony or Craig. It is interesting to see that there are, I mean, this subject, it's been noticed, hasn't it? It's been noticed by this man. It's been noticed that it was a green and a blue one. And now, because we know that Tucker drove a green one, it makes this story a little bit better. And, you know, at first, by reading that statement alone, you would assume that Tucker was in the blue one with Craig. But now we know that Tucker actually drove a green one. It brings a different dimension to the story, doesn't it? Do you see what I mean? This statement isn't really of relevance. It's just interesting now that it's opened up, and we know that Tucker drove this green one. You'll see what I'm getting at in a minute. Right, well, my apologies guys, I've seemed to overlook something here. There's okay, I have got it, I'm sure, I know I've got it somewhere. I've got more sightings of this green Range Rover, okay? I've got one more to show you, but this is the finale of the video, should we say. But offhand, I can't show you. I haven't got the proof in front of me, but you know, I wouldn't say these things if I haven't seen it. There are statements that say they've seen the Range Rover, and they've seen the green Range Rover and the blue Range Rover, and I'm sure there's another one that at least say that they've seen the green Range Rover and the blue Range Rover together. The point of showing you those statements are that it just gives you an idea that now there's a green one and a blue one involved, that they do sometimes work together. They've been seen together. Tucker drives his, Craig will drive the other one, and they're often seen together. The only point of showing you those statements, I may actually been completely off there and thought that I've seen more when I haven't, but I'm more than sure that there is. Okay, just leave it at that. I mean, if you're familiar to these statements and you know that you've seen more on this green Range Rover, the green Range Rover being mentioned, I mean, you know, you can now put it into context that may have been Tucker. I thought I bookmarked the ones where that it's mentioned the green ones, but I've only got these two, and obviously the finale. That's going to come in a minute. You'll see what I mean. Right. As I say, look, the point of that is just to say that there's two Range Rovers involved, and sometimes they work together, and sometimes they're seen together. Right, now this is where it gets interesting, and I'm more than sure that a good few of you have already twigged about what I'm going to say. I'm more than sure that a lot of you even may have twigged where I'm going with this. And yeah, you're exactly right. And if you haven't twigged yet, all will come apparent in a minute. So, we are on the night of the 6th of December 1995. And the story goes that Tony and Craig are in the blue Range Rover going towards Workhouse Lane in Rettendon. Now, I don't know if you can remember, but this is the statement from Rebecca Carr, who the police have actually used more of this statement than any other statement. They actually used it in Darren Nichols' trial points, if you remember. And this is her suggesting that at 5:25 she saw this Range Rover with 3 people in the car at the Rettendon Turnpike with a white car. Remember, it's the Sierra Saloon car. We're more on about the Range Rover here and the sighting of the Range Rover. She's saying that there's a Sierra and there were very big people in there, big stocky people, and there were it was followed by the Range Rover. Remember, it's the one that sped off, this speed up damn thing. Didn't think the Range Rover was keeping up until they got down to the bottom of the hill, where the Sierra actually put his lights on and it made everybody stop, remember? Then the Sierra indicated, and when the Sierra indicated, so did the Range Rover, and they both pulled in, remember? I mean, if you got a chance to read that whilst I was saying that, well done. I'm not going to read it, that was just a reminder, but it's at 5:25, look. And again, just a reminder, she then went on to report again, the same Rebecca Carr, saying, look, she further to my previous statement made on the 9th, I've been shown 2 photographs, and this, she says, I recognise to be one who was sitting in the back of the Range Rover that I've previously described. Right, and it's important, this is, for the nature of this video, to see what she says here. Look, she says, I've also been shown a copy of a photograph. This appears to be one of the men in the front, possibly the driver. Seems to have longer hair than the man in the back and seems to have a square appearance at the back. Now, in all honesty, nobody knows who she's on about. She could have been on about Craig or Tony, but don't forget that Craig was actually wearing one of those coats that had like a bit of a wool around the back, around the collar. She's definitely described Pat Tate being the man in the back. Again, just to recap, another one from Rebecca Carr. This is his 3rd, and you can tell already she's really trying to help out wherever she can. And she's saying, look, you know, the Previous statement regarding the white Sierra Saloon and the dark coloured Range Rover on Wednesday the 6th of December 95. She now realises that the time was a little bit later. She says that it was she was in Benfleet, she had to drop a mate off, and she says no, it was about 5:45, she said. Previously she said it was 5:25, remember, now she's saying look, it's 20 minutes later at 5:45. And you know, good on her, I say, good on her, because she is, you can tell that she's racking her brains. This woman has seen a Range Rover that could be possibly involved in a triple shooting, triple murder. It's massive, it's in every newspaper, it's big, it's on the TV all the time, and this woman, she may have seen it. She pulls up alongside it. She remembers it. She remembers the incident. She remembers it well because the white car and the Range Rover. She's sure that it was Wednesday, so she's probably excited. You know, she's probably excited that she's involved and that she's got this information, and it's important information. So this is her third statement to say, well, so her first one was, okay, I remember this, I remember it being the white Sierra was there and the Range Rover was behind it, and it turned and it was about 5:25. The second is like absolutely, you know, it's basically her saying, look, if I can help, I'll help you. And the police have gone to her, look, we're looking for help, can you try and identify who was in the back of this Range Rover? She's gladly said yes. Okay, that is the man in the back. That one there looks like the one in the front. You know, she's getting all, it's probably important to her that she gets this information out. Do you know what I mean? And then, of course, she's racked her brains a little bit more. That's going to be playing on her mind, that she's playing an active part in the investigation here. You know, she's got this vital information. And she said then, she's been thinking about it, and she said, okay, what did I do? Where was I? How long was I? Was it really 5:25? And she's realised that actually it might have been a little bit later than that, because she probably asked around who was she with, and she said she was with a friend and she had to drop a friend off, and it was probably about 5:45 time. So God bless her that she's actually done her best here to rack her brains and then get back in touch with the police to give all the information that she possibly can. And this time is actually going down in history. I don't know if you realise that. This time is going down in history, in this legend of a story, or that is the story that has become legend. It's this time that's important here. Okay, so look, 5:45 she's saying there. Okay, so the turnpike, Rettendon Turnpike, is not far away from Workhouse Lane. So this incident happened with the white Sierra, and what's important here is that it's been seen. Okay, the Range Rover's been seen going down there, and more important still than that is that the Range Rover has actually pulled on to the land. It's pulled on to the land where it's going to be found. She doesn't say a colour here. It's still important to remind ourselves that she's talking about a dark coloured Range Rover. Now we know that Tony had a green one. You know, you never know, do you? This could be Tony's, you know, or the blue one. But we've always gone along with it, and even the police believe that this is our Range Rover. This is the blue one, okay? It's important to obviously remind ourselves, looking at it all from all angles, I would safely say that this is the blue Range Rover as well, because she's identified Pat Tate in the back. Do you know what I mean? Pat Tate was found in the back of the blue one, so, you know, I'm saying that clearly identified as the blue Range Rover here, right? And what could be seen as quite important, as you're now going to find out, she hasn't identified the passenger. Right, so we get to the finale of the video. So how do I put this? How do I make it so that you... Let me paint you a little picture. 23 years ago, this crime happened. 1995, December 1995. And we're in a metallic blue Range Rover. 3 men, well-known drug dealers, have been found shot to pieces in this blue Range Rover. Fast forward 23 years, some bloke on YouTube starts making videos, and in one of these videos, and he looks at the green Range Rover, and that Tony Tucker had this green Range Rover, and it's been seen together. It's been seen being driven by Tucker, and we know that there's a blue one because that's where they were found. We now know that there's a green one, and it's Tucker's. Now, this story can either go one way or the other during this finale. It will either make you go, oh no, that's just complicated everything. Or it will make you go, ah, yes, even more to the story. Now, you know me, I love this story. For me personally, this has just opened a door that says, you know, absolutely wicked. I love that. That's brilliant. Just gives a little bit more to think about. Now, we've been talking about this green Range Rover with Tony Tucker's and Tony Pound Craig have been found in this blue one. The story goes, they went in this blue Range Rover to this lane, and that's where it happened, that they were shot and killed, and they were left good riddance. Now, this is what I'm talking about. If I told you that we've got note here from Rebecca Carr saying that she saw the blue Range Rover with Pate in the back turning into the car park, albeit with a white Sierra. We also know from other statements that we've got the blue Range Rover crossing the road, and that's stuck in their mind because they're the ones who have let the Range Rover cross. Now, if I said to you that the green Range Rover was also at the lane, because of the nature of these videos, you'd just assume that I'm making that up. You'd assume that it's just another one of my wild theories. Well, in fact, no, because we've got the sighting of our green Range Rover pulling into the lane. And if you've been following the videos, you'll know which one I'm talking about. It's the one with the grills over the lights. Remember? I actually made a video on it. It's called the replica Range Rover. There are 2 sightings of 2 Range Rovers going into this lane. One's the blue one without the grills on the lights, and one's a green one with grills on the light. And this is the statement. I'm not going to read it out because it is long, but this is just the proof that I'm not just making this up. It's from Raymond Wright. I think his name's Raymond. Yeah, Raymond Alfred Wright. He made this on the 13th of 1295. He says he's the owner of a Ford Escort estate motor vehicle. He was in it on the Wednesday the 6th of 12th. He was with his wife. They've been to a funeral. They were coming along this road. This time is very interesting as well. He's saying that the route that he took was through Pitsea to this Sadler's Farm roundabout. And this time that he says here, he says, look, he arrived at home at about 7:25, but he was travelling along the A130. He went to the Rettendon Turnpike, and then you come to the Rettendon Village, and he says, look, the road then goes into a series of bends on a decline on the road. Because I'm a regular user of the road, I'm aware of these bends, that there are situated a farm shop and a gun club on the right hand side of the road. He says, as I entered the decline, I became aware that the vehicles in front of me had slowed down. this would have been about 250 foot earlier than it would have than I would have anticipated stop him. He said he slowly caught up with the vehicles in front, but I had to brake quite heavily in the end because I had anticipated that any vehicle would be turning into the farm. I then stopped in the line of traffic, and I believe I was 2 or 3 cars from the front of the line. I believe I was stationary for about 10 seconds when an oncoming vehicle left a gap for the vehicle that was turning right to cut across the traffic. As it did, I could see that the vehicle was a 4x4 vehicle, and because of the shape of the rear of the vehicle and the grille over the rear lights, my immediate reaction was that it was a Range Rover. I believe the colour was a darkened colour, and I think it was possibly green. He says, I don't know, but I think there were at least 3 people in the vehicle, and I think there may have been 4. He says, I was aware that there was a driver of the vehicle who was in the dark and a person who was sitting in the rear of the vehicle behind the driver's seat. The person, who I believe to be a man because of his size, appeared to be bigger than the driver. He was wearing a light coloured upper garment. As the vehicle started to turn, I got the impression the driver the person in the back looked over his shoulder in the direction of Rettendon Turnpike. The vehicle then went into the farm track that I did not know existed. He says that he then continued home. He believed on his calculations that it was between 6:50 and 7 o'clock because it normally takes him about 30 minutes to travel home from there. He says, I don't believe it was more than 2 cars behind the Range Rover, so when I turned I would have no more than 30 foot from the vehicle. Right, so there you go. If that hasn't spun your head, I don't know what will. Right, now the way this is planning out, and this is suggested. Now look, if you can't work it out in your head, let me do it for you. Look, this woman, Rebecca Carr, has identified this Range Rover to have Pat Tate in the back. This is the one that she saw at the Rettendon Turnpike. Right, she saw Rettendon Turnpike, our Range Rover. Okay, it's got Pat Tate in it, and she says that she recognised somebody in the front. It's more or less, I would say, 90-95% positive identification that this vehicle is the one of interest. It's ours. It's part of our story. Now she says that our Range Rover, the one with Pat Tate in it, was following a white Sierra, and it pulled in to White House Farm with the white Sierra. And she said that that was, for argument's sake, between 25 past 5 to 5:45. So on that, if, of course, again, it's still a big if, because she may have made a mistake, you just don't know, do you? If this was our Range Rover, by this lady's recollection, it is. Okay, the blue Range Rover, I would say, has arrived with a white Sierra. Now, because the blue Range Rover is the one of interest and it's at the gate, I would say that if this is our Range Rover, it pulled in with this white Sierra, did whatever it did. I don't know what happened to the white Sierra, but the blue Range Rover has then gone off and parked up at this lane. The engine's turned off. Could be that they were having a smoke because the sunroof's open a tiny bit, but there's definitely 3 people in it. Right, now we've got an hour before this other Range Rover arrives. And by this is the sighting. Look, the story goes that there was a Range Rover spotted turning in to this lane, and it turns in normally, nicely. That's what's been suggested in this story all along, is that this blue Range Rover came along this road, came up to this lane, and then turned in nicely. The traffic on the other side had to stop, and it stopped to let this Range Rover in. we've been led to believe all this time that this was the blue Range Rover. But the sighting of this happening is a green Range Rover. This man is saying it was a green Range Rover, or possibly a green Range Rover, but he's saying it's got grills over the lights. So it's definitely not our Range Rover, our blue Range Rover. And besides, the Range Rover that pulled in with the Sierra didn't pull into our lane. It pulled into the car park of White House Farm. And she's positively identified Pat Tate being in the back. So Pat Tate's Range Rover has gone down this road and pulled in to White House Farm. An hour later, a green Range Rover pulls into the lane nicely. It's pulled into the lane and it hasn't pulled in to the car park. We now know that Tony Tucker had a green Range Rover. Now, obviously, it's only theory still. We still don't know about this green Range Rover from top to bottom. Now, if we can find out if this green Range Rover had grills over the back of its lights, then this is Tony Tucker in his green Range Rover pulling up at the lane. It's not our blue Range Rover anyway, we know that. It doesn't matter if they've missed the colour of this thing. It may be that, you know, it is a blue Range Rover, they've got the colour wrong, but he said, look, it's got grills over the lights. It's got the grills over the lights and it's green. And it's an hour later. Tucker drives a green Range Rover. Both blue, identified with Pat Tate in the back, and this green Range Rover have been seen pulling in to these lanes. Now, this is obviously going to be news to some people, and it's a good discussion point, and it does open things up for great discussion. But personally, I can't think of anything at the moment that could have happened now, because that seems to be brand new. It's all if, buts and maybes, but if it was Tucker arriving in his green Range Rover, that changes everything massively, because Tucker's got mud on his boots as well. So it would make sense, wouldn't it, that he got out to go and see and speak to Pat. But who were there, you know? I mean, there's 3 people in the blue Range Rover. If it's not Tony, then who is it? And this man says that there's 3, possibly 4 people in the green Range Rover. Like I say, this could either make you go, oh, what the hell is that? How that complicates everything. Or it gets you a little bit more excited and makes you go, ah, nice one, alright, that's what we need in this. You know, that could be a great clue. It could be you know, a jigsaw for you to go and solve, an extra jigsaw you have to go and solve. You know, is it true? Isn't it true? It brings this whole massive other dimension on, doesn't it? I mean, Tucker drives a green Range Rover. They were all found in a blue Range Rover. There's a positive identification of Pat Tate being in our Range Rover. That pulled into White House Lane an hour before this green Range Rover is seen pulling in to the lane as well. It's pickled things for me a little bit. I don't know which way to think regarding this. I don't know what to think. It's going to take a little bit of time for me personally to actually get my head around that. It may be nothing. It may be everything. It may be the reason why nobody can sort this stuff out. It may be the reason why nobody can actually identify anything that happened that night, because it gets really, really confusing. Nobody's ever thought that both Range Rovers could have been involved. It completely messes things up a little bit, don't it, really? We've been led to believe that there's one Range Rover all this time pulled into the lane. They were taken down there for whatever reason, drugs, guns, money, whatever, but then somebody jumped out, killed them. Could have been one person there, 2 people. This is suggesting, no, there were a lot more people. In fact, there were 2 Range Rovers there. And more confusing now, because now we know Tony Tucker drove a green Range Rover, and we've got a positive identification of a green Range Rover pulling in to the lane. Pat Tate's Range Rover, the blue Range Rover I'm assuming, didn't pull into the lane. It pulled into the car park of White House Farm. This green Range Rover is the only sighting that we've seen pulling into the lane normally and nicely. So I know this is a great discussion point, and I know this is going to be one of those times where you think, oh, that's going to spin your head. So you know, good luck with that. I hope you enjoyed that, guys. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves.